Okay. Welcome everyone to our third Close to Home webinar. I'm Kate Duvall. I'm the president of Piedmont CASA. I'm so delighted to see you all with us today. I'm going to take a few minutes just to introduce Nancy Carpenter and Frank Valdez, who are our speakers today, and just give you a little bit of background about the topic that we're going to be talking about and how we see that impacting kids and families in our area. So thank you. I'm gonna, sorry, I need to have pulled up a few things. So I'm just gonna pull my introductions over here so I can take a look at them. So Frank Valdez is a youth justice program organizer at the Legal Aid Justice Center, which is my former home, and I told Frank we're just basically family now, so he's got to take me because I used to work over there. Frank's originally from Houston, Texas. He graduated from the University of Virginia with a degree in global development studies, and during his undergraduate career there, he served as the co-president of the UVA chapter of Political Latinx United for Movement and Action in Society, interned with the LAJC Virginia Justice Project for Farm and Immigrant Workers, and also interned with the Virginia Youth Solidarity for Immigrant and Migrant Workers Initiative. So welcome, Frank. Nancy Carpenter is a homelessness prevention coordinator at the Haven. Nancy has experience working with activist groups, including Virginia Organizing, the Charlottesville Center for Peace and Justice, and Equity and Progress in Charlottesville. In 2020, Nancy was selected by the City Council to serve 3 years as on the Charlottesville Police Civilian Review Board as the social justice representative. She is a longtime advocate for the homeless and others facing poverty. So thank you, Nancy and Frank, for being here. Just to give you a little bit of background about this topic and why we're covering it at CASA, which is a program that works on behalf of abused and neglected kids. According to a recent regional housing study, the median price of a home in Charlottesville and Albemarle was $450,000. The amount a family earning $45,000 can afford for a home is just over $200,000. So there's no way they're getting to that $450,000 mark. For the 3,000 families in Charlottesville making less than $15,000 a year, owning a home is simply unattainable. Just renting can even exceed the annual income for a family living in poverty in our area. In addition, housing is typically one of the largest family expenses. High housing costs weigh more heavily on low-income families, which are more likely to struggle with finding affordable housing, often spending more than 30% of pre-tax income on a home, whether they rent or own, like I mentioned before. Paying too much for housing limits the resources families have for other necessities such as childcare, food, healthcare, and transportation, as well as their ability to save and achieve financial stability. This is really why poverty and housing insecurity is a huge risk factor for kids coming into the foster care system. I'm going to turn it over to our experts, Frank and Nancy, and Frank will get us started first to shed a little bit more light on this subject. If you have questions, please use the chat. You can send them to me directly, or you can send them to the whole group. And most of our questions we'll save for the end, but if they're really on point and relevant, then I may interrupt our speakers to bring those to the table as we're going through it. So let me get Frank unmuted.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Kate. But first, I wanted to say thank you to Kate and Nancy. It's such an honor to be speaking, just being on the same Zoom with y'all, as I have so much respect for y'all and the work that y'all have done in the community. And I have learned so much just from hearing the work that y'all do. So it's an honor to be with y'all today. And thank you everyone else for coming. So yes, my name is Frank Valdez. I am the Youth Justice Program I'm part of the Youth Justice Program for the Legway Justice Center in the Charlottesville office. In my role, I work on a variety of projects that relate to youth advocacy, such as the Fund Our Schools campaign. I also look into issues involving policing in schools. And also, one of my main involvements, which is why I'm here today, is child welfare and analyzing the child welfare and foster care system here in the Charlottesville area. And on top of that, also, I occasionally look into stuff dealing with juvenile justice. And so one thing I think I want to say, first of all, is about the importance of intersections. When people think of youth advocacy, I don't think housing is the first thing that comes up. But when you're dealing with youth, I think it's important to realize like all these issues, like housing, like immigration, how they all always go back to youth. Youth are affected by all these different issues. And with housing especially, housing instability is frequently cited as a reason to take away custody or deny the return of a child to their family when they are impacted by the child welfare system. So that's why in a lot of my work that I do, I like to center housing and really educate myself on the history of housing displacement in our community, because if we're going to talk about education equity, it is important to understand that the reality of our world, unfortunately, is that where we live does determine what school our kids get into, and their access to a variety of resources. So what are some of the main problems that we are seeing when it comes to youth? Unstable housing conditions or conditions like mold are often get associated with parents, which affects their interactions with Department of Social Services, and which many of the times this is the fault of absentee landlords. We also have seen unstable housing conditions. We know that unstable housing conditions also have their roots in poverty and not any fundamental unfitness of the parent. So this goes back to criminalizing poverty and access to housing, the unaccessibility of housing, how many times parents who are already struggling through a difficult situation with their interactions with the child welfare system will get blamed for their housing when it is much out of their control and is a very systemic problem in our community. And to go further, ways that we have seen homelessness impact real life families in our community, especially when it comes to youth and the education system, includes delays in school enrollment or truancy. Parents that are already struggling just to like go to work and then and find housing. Not only are they dealing with that, but then this can extend to the classroom. And then when they have problems taking their kids on time to school because of their unstable housing conditions, this can include more charges, which goes back to criminalizing punitive measures to that they deal with instead of helping them find resources to get them out of the situation. When you are going through like students are absent in schools, or this only furthers the negative impact on the child through lack of engagement of the child in the school, and being part of that school community. This can lead to misinformation, lack of participation of parents in school meetings. As we know, parent involvement is very important in the development of a child, a successful development through their primary years in the education system. This also leads, aside from school, back to the house. The lack of affordable housing can also impact a child when it comes to the access to public benefits or eligibility, because family household size changes and the income changes because of temporary living situations. This actually can make it harder for a family experiencing homelessness to receive benefits such as SNAP, or also SSI, which is Supplemental Security Income, and TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And And yes, and besides that, other little things that we don't even think about, like mailing. So our mail address, not having permanent mail address just leads to further lack of um, information, missed paperwork, and that also can affect benefits. Um, and when we go even deeper than that into the mental health, we also see how this can just lead to chronic stress of already existing problems, as well as chronic absenteeism from parents. And I also wanted to take a second to talk about some stories, a lot of this information I've heard, not only from families, but also from attorneys and community organizers who have been doing the work here, working with houseless individuals and people struggling with these issues. So some attorneys I've worked with have talked about how they've seen parents caught in a terrible catch-22 situation with public housing. So their children are removed for whatever reason. This could be because of domestic violence, drugs, or abuse. So they no longer qualify for a unit with whatever number of bedrooms they originally had. So they are moved into a smaller unit, but then they can get caught. They can't get their kids back because they don't have enough bedrooms to house them. So it can be very, very difficult for all those things to line up just so parents can get their kids back. Other stories include parents losing custody of their children over the years because they didn't have stable housing situation, even though the other parent was abusive to the children or the other partner. And these are not necessarily situations where DSS is involved, just the judge making the decision and maybe the recommendation, making a recommendation. So this makes us question whether housing should always trump the security of a child's primary attachment or the potential for abuse from the parent with more stable housing. So sometimes a child might be safer couch surfing with a safe parent than being in a permanent home with a dangerous parent. And so that just goes back to housing being, it's a basic necessity, and it shouldn't be talked about like this is something that a parent is at fault for. It's a lack of affordable housing in our community. Domestic survivors can also face a lot of barriers to finding housing, including safety concerns, bad credit due to financial abuse, and the lack of income because their abusive partner wouldn't let them work or wouldn't let them make their own money. So this also stems from other issues of domestic violence. It's not at the fault of the parent for them not having this financial resources. This also makes it more difficult to win custody or have children returned once they are removed. And I also wanted to talk about a law called the McKinney-Vento protections, that there are laws to protect homeless children and their enrollment in schools. Each school has a liaison under the federal law who should help with enrollment of students who are homeless. I can plug this information later on to Kate to share with you all if you would like. But yes, so what can be done? So there are a variety of measures that can be done. Both private and public actors can get involved in solving this problem long-term and short-term. Long-term, we can increase the supply of affordable housing overall. This requires public investment in the creation or continued investment in existing public or other subsidized housing. As we know, the Charlottesville Redevelopment Housing Authority, Habitat or Piedmont Housing Alliance in town who are trying very hard to create new improved housing in the city. And this also requires some change in our land use and zoning, shorter term investments and other programs like the voucher program that the city has created could try to overcome the affordable housing problem. And yes, sorry, I just saw a message on the chat. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for that. And yes, and I also wanted to just quickly share a little bit about what LAJC is doing before I pass it off to Nancy. But Legal Aid Justice Center has actively advocated for years for meaningful increases in affordable housing stock for low-income families in the Charlottesville area. We work alongside the Public Housing Association of Residents and more broadly the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition to eliminate the enshrined racism of exclusionary single-family zoning, which was purposely designed to prevent integration and meaningful access to affordable housing. So we support the vision for increased affordable housing for households with very low income, which can be accomplished via the future land use map recommended last week actually by the Planning Commission, in conjunction with resident-centered redevelopment of public housing and meaningful funding of affordable housing in the city. And so, yes, I can pass it on to Nancy because I know this will turn into more conversation. I'm certain Nancy has a lot to say too. But thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. I want to say good afternoon to everyone, and I want to thank Kate for this chance to speak to some of the choir, so to speak, and some of those who want to join the choir even more deeply. And I want to thank Frank for his insightful information, because I certainly wrote down some of the points that he brought out. And I think one of the ones that resonates with me the most is the intersectionality of housing with every other social justice issue that we talk about in these Zooms and in these rooms. I do administer a HUD-funded program called Homelessness Prevention. And I'd like to give like a definition to that, because it kind of will help to lay the foundation for some of the other information. So as I said, it's a HUD-funded program, and the definition will help to pinpoint why this program is so important in this discussion about the child welfare system. It provides people with the ways and means to address their housing insecurity, who are at risk of imminently either ending up on the street or in an emergency shelter. Now, that's the HUD definition of homelessness. Now, Frank touched on McKinney-Vento, which has an educational component to it that also maintains that children are homeless when they are doubled up. I think the term is couch surfing that we use due to loss of housing or an economic hardship or something like that. So I think that gives us, it's an intervention. Homeless prevention can be considered, I think, an intervention with the focus, if it's being used as an intervention, to reduce, I think, a child's involvement in the welfare system. And I'd like to also bring out who in this community the homeless prevention program is serving. So I'd like to share, if I could, for a few minutes, some data that came out of the FY 2021 fiscal year on the folks that this program that I administer served. So we served a total of 59 distinct individuals and families throughout the year. That was made up of 17 families that incorporated a total of 31 children. And then we also had 42 adult individuals that we served. So that was the adults in this group made up a total of 64 individual adults and 31 children. I looked at the gender identification for the adults, and even though the whole spectrum is available for gender identification, the main two were what people identified with as adults. So we had 39 of the 64 individuals identified as women, which was 61% of that total of adults, and then 25 individuals identified as male, which was 39%. So almost 2 to 1 women over men access this program. Now, when you want to look at the gender, I also pulled out data for gender of the children. And of the 31 children, 18 were identified as male, so it was 58% of the total population of children. And then 13 children were identified as female, which is 42% of the group that we served, which I think is kind of interesting. Then we also want to look, I also pulled out data about racial information, which I think also is important when we're discussing housing insecurity in this community specifically. So there, out of the individuals that were served, both adults and children, 59 individuals identified as Black or African American, which was 62% of that group that was served. We had 34 individuals, adults and children, that identified as white or Caucasian, which was 36%, and actually 2 individuals identified as multiracial, which was 2%. So a very large component of the people who have housing insecurity, when you look at the overall population of our community, that they are a small part of that population, but a large part of those facing housing insecurity. One of the other things that has tracked over the 5 years that I've been doing this program is data on the ethnicity of the individuals that come through this program. And those that do not identify as Latinx or Hispanic were 87 individuals. So 92% of the people that came through this program did not identify as Latinx or Hispanic. And that's been so, and I have ideas that why that is, but I don't have the data to back up that information. So I think that, you know, is very telling about the layers of our community, how they access resources or who they access resources from. Now, I also wanted to pull out some data, because we're talking about children, about the ages of the children that we had. So we had 31 children served through this program. And so in the ages of 13 to 17, so the teenager high school year group, there were 7 children. So that was only 22% of the children were teenagers. We had another group that was pulled out 5 to 12. So your preschool, your elementary, sort of middle school type children age group, there were 13 children. So that was 42%. And then the under 5 group were 11 children that were in that age group. So that's 36%. So quite a few children are young, you know, 12 and under, very young. And then looking at the age group of the adults, the largest group, well, the largest groups were the 25 to 34-year-olds. There were 17 individuals, and that was 27%. We had 12 individuals that were 35 to 44 years of age, and that was 19%. Then 14 individuals were 45 to 54, totaling 22%. So that's 68% of your population that are in those years that you consider childbearing and child rearing, and in, you know, your supposedly your high income earning years. I put that in quotation marks. And if you couple that with the information that we have a high incidence of women and African American women and single moms, that's, you know, that is a very telling statistic about, you know, our community. And in fact, I think it kind of tracks with some national information, because I was on a webinar and I forgot the name of it. I didn't write it down, but they said that the average individual that's seeking homeless prevention nationally is a single mom in their 20s with 2 children, and that homeless moms and children, in those family dynamics, 80% have experienced domestic violence. So we can see how the housing is the anchor, it's the hub for anything and everything, whether it's, you know, the education piece that Frank was talking about, the physical health, the mental health, the you know, family trauma through, you know, either DV or child abuse, that these are all exacerbated by, you know, not having that anchor of stable housing. So for me, I think one of the questions that Kate wanted to know is, how do these families touch down in homeless prevention versus other agencies? And I get a lot of calls from specific agencies that are dealing with children, such as Families in Crisis, the social service agencies, even Region 10. because they'll call to kind of understand the program to see if they have, a family that will be a fit for that program. Then they go through a process which requires a call, an appointment, an assessment, and then referral over to me for hopefully some financial assistance that will either take care of rent arrears, or if it's a situation where they're in an unsafe, doubled up situation that they've been able to identify and locate and be approved for, which is another whole long process for a home. And I get involved. I, talk to the attorneys. I talk to the landlords, try to figure out what they need, and try to provide at least that financial piece, and sometimes even a substantial amount of financial assistance to create stability with those families. So I think that's what I found as far as other services for homeless kids and families. Now I look at it from more of a financial lens than other individuals might. So, the agencies that I've seen that help with the financial pieces of it would be the Alliance of Interfaith Ministries, or AIM. If you're a city or a county resident, the Pathways Fund, that's administered by the city's Human Services Department through their community resource line is one. If you're, right now, there's a big push for those who have rent arrears to work or to access the rent relief program by the state, which I know LAJC has a small grant from the city to help, folks access that system who may need the technological savvy of those navigators that are doing that work. But that's also, a way to create, housing security, because the state can pay some, monies in advance, towards current rent and that. And then there's also social services. If you're a client, there's a particular pot that exists there for clients there. We have the prevention program at the Haven, and we also have a private funding program, Haven Housing Fund, that we've done private fundraising for, that has been in existence for a couple of years now, and has helped families and individuals stay housed or, get housed. So I think with that, like I said, housing is, to me, is a human right. It's, the United States has adopted that as a policy since the 1948 UN Declaration on Human Rights. And I think that locally we can do things such as, advocate for policies that are very robust when it comes to accessory dwelling units. Let's do that. The most affordable housing is that which you're in. So if you're a homeowner and you need, housing repairs, let's make sure that that program that exists as AHIP right now, which is a home improvement program, is more robust, so that individuals do not feel you've seen all these signs, we buy houses in lots of areas that have housing prices that are trending lower than some of the other areas of, in cities or in counties. So we can keep people in their housing through asking for more money for those programs. That's important. I think, like I agree with what Frank said, invest more in public housing and keep it maintained. Don't let it run down. And also perhaps lead to home ownership out of those, maybe within those communities, and scatter site them. Don't just have them in one area. I think is what we're looking at. So I'd like to leave some time for some questions.
Yeah, Nancy, this is Kate. I had a question for you. Actually, I wanted to hop in a little bit earlier, so hopefully I haven't missed. No, that's okay. Everything you're saying was great, so I didn't want to interrupt. You were listing some of the service providers
Yes.
and folks who were kind of able to help in these situations, AIM and then some of the others. Are those providers folks that individuals or families can reach out to on their own, or should be reaching out to on their own, or should they be going through is there some sort of central hub that they should be going through to when a family really is in crisis when it comes to housing?
They could go through the community resource line if they're not familiar with agencies, if this is their first experience with housing insecurity. I mean, there's that. If they have a case manager or something, work from an aspect of a team aspect. I've been in, and that was something else I wanted to bring out, that, housing is part of the team. If you're trying to stabilize someone, you should have someone that's involved with the financial piece of housing stability around that table as you're trying to, if you're a case manager trying to help work with the family to create, stability in that aspect. A lot of these agencies do a lot of outreach, in the community, so they're somewhat known. So you can do both. Because I get a lot of also word of mouth when people call me directly. It's like I've helped someone that they know, or they've heard about it through a newsletter or something that a coworker has put out there as far as outreach. And I do get direct, and I'm perfectly fine with talking to people about explaining what this program is that I particularly do. So it just depends, on how empowered you feel to try and contact those agencies yourself, or whether you want to get, a list of resources that might be able to assist you, no matter what your need is outside of the housing piece or the financial piece of it.
Great. I have a few other questions in the hopper, so I'm gonna keep going. And Frank, feel free to chime in anytime. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about McKinney-Vento. Laura, I don't know, maybe we need to call a lifeline and have Laura chime in too. She didn't know she was going to be a panelist, but I wanted to, if you could, just kind of the quick and dirty, how does McKinney-Vento help kids who are experiencing homelessness? What doors does it? Oh, thanks, Frank. I saw that fact sheet go in. Thank you very much. But for our CASA volunteers who may be looking at kids who need some advocacy in the world of McKinney-Vento, what does that do for kids?
I'll defer to Frank, because as a youth organizer, he's probably come across this quite a bit more than I have.
Oh yeah, actually, like what I shared, this is something I'm also hoping to get more familiar with myself. But yeah, I don't know if Laura has any information, but from what I know, it's one of the laws, and that fact sheet has more information. Because I don't want to quote anything wrong, but yeah, that it just one of the protections for homeless children and also disabled homeless children, to make sure that they are able to enroll without problem. And this is one of the many protections of protections. Legway Justice Center also, we do have represented, we occasionally represent kids who have had to change schools or advocate to stay in the same school while experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. So this is one of the federal laws that allows us to do that. And we have also provided eviction defense to assist families with other legal housing problems.
Great. And Laura's unmuted. So Laura, you want, I hate to cold call you.
No, you're fine.
I'd love to get your
It's great. I actually, yeah, it's great. If you wanted to make me a co-host, I have a couple of slides pulled up and I could share my screen with you right now and just flash you what our services are.
All right.
I can do it right now. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm the liaison for Albemarle County Schools homeless program, and it is under McKinney-Vento legislation, which is to remove barriers that homeless students might experience to success in school. Opportunities that are available for everyone should be available for homeless students. I can get in here and show you this real quick couple things. So So I always say our mission is to get them in school and keep them in school. So if we have homeless students who do not have their documents, primarily residency proof would be the main one, but they may not have their birth certificate or health records, we assist with that. The other part, as Frank mentioned, is if they do move and lose and they lost housing and they qualify under the criteria, it is specific criteria, and it's a little bit different than HUD definition. Then we can request for them to remain in that home-based school for the remainder of the school year. And we do attempt to provide transportation as much as possible. I'm going to skip through here. There's our definitions of the criteria and the typical scenarios of where people may be sleeping at night. It could be irregular. They could be moving around. They might be at grandma's during the week and a hotel on the weekend, or vice versa. The majority of our students in Albemarle County schools are doubled up. So they're with 2 or 3 other families in an apartment or a trailer, living maybe 4 or 5 people in an apartment room. Typically students might move 3 or 4 times a year. So it's really important to get them back into that home-based school if we can, so that they're not missing school or out of school for extended periods. And then as far as our services, I wanted you all to see is just that assistance with enrollment, and legally we have to get them in very quickly. It is immediate enrollment. And so if they come and they don't have their residency proof, we contact the school registrar, we contact transportation, and they're supposed to be in the next day or within 2 days. And I imagine that's where, Frank, you all probably come in at times. But we really, in Albemarle County, I think this is one of our strengths. Our transportation department really blows us away. I mean, they will route the students the same day or the next day when they get a request from us, which normally the transportation requests take longer than that, just for routing purposes. And then we provide other supports. We have a tutoring program, emergency help. We do coordinate with TJAC for we have a small grant for emergency hotel stay. And we're constantly referring to community resources. So that's a quick snapshot. There it is. Let me know what questions you might have. Yeah. Thanks for letting me.
I had a quick question that, Laura, before you mute.
Yeah.
Are foster parents eligible for this kind of support on behalf of the kids that they are fostering?
So legally, once the student goes into foster care, or even if it's not foster and it's a DSS determined safety plan, then it is no longer under McKinney-Vento. Then it's just DSS working directly with the school for those registration needs and placement needs.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Thanks. No, thank you for chiming in. So Nancy and Frank, I have another question from you for you. We know from many other cities that people who are struggling with addiction or other mental health issues or joblessness and homeless, that the best chance of them regaining their footing in life is to provide housing as a first intervention. The Crossings development seems to be a big success. What are the barriers to doing more of this for families with children?
Political will. I mean, there's a climate that seems to be, well, if that wants to find fault with individuals, that if you can't make enough money, if you can't do this, or if you can't do that, it's all your fault and this is what happens. But I think we need to, drive there again. It talks about what Frank said at the beginning, intersectionality. We don't have enough resources for those who truly want to address their crises when it comes to their mental health, or the crises that come from, substance addiction. So those are, long-term public policies that we've got to advocate for, not lose what we have, but advocate for more of that. And then also create that team coming out of, because I've seen that happen so often. People come out of they're out of treatment, no matter what it's for, and there's no housing plan. Absolutely none. I know it's going to create, we need more individual, we need we need to we need to reallocate a lot of our national funding and put it into these programs long term that are more social programs. You know, I'm sorry, take it away from some of these other budgets that are way bloated nationally and put them in this, because until we do, I think we're always going to be hitting a wall of availability. I mean, the same thing is with reentry, you know, because we have we have mass incarceration. We had the 80s and 90s where a lot of men of color were picked up on charges. They were taken out of the home. That created a lot of stress on women. We're now finding as our system has progressed that more women who were not primarily involved in these cases, especially drug cases, they were, what do they call it? They were secondary to what was going on. Yeah, accomplices. That's what it is. And now they're coming out, their children, have gone into the system. If they can't find kinship care, they're coming out of the system. They don't know, there's no plan. And we have to do better, I think, with reentry as well. If you're talking about children that have gone into care, I think that I have seen, an overabundance of the use of incarceration for single moms. And then they're coming out with nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. Men too, so all of that intersectionality, we have to have the political will, and we can tackle it. We can do it. We could do it if we had the political will. And that's why when I see people like Frank, who's way younger than I am, coming up through the ranks, and other individuals coming up through the ranks, I feel like, they're listening. People are listening, and they're going to carry on and push these things forward.
Want to add anything there, Frank? Or you?
I think Nancy said it beautifully. I think, especially when it comes, I think our society tries to deal with a lot of these issues in our community through punitive measures that are really not tackling the issue at the root, are not transforming anything. Like when we said we have so much emphasis, at least I remember growing up in Houston, like on truancy laws, on in low-income communities, like all this emphasis on criminalizing poverty, parents who are already struggling, who want the best for their children, who are trying to get their children to school, trying to provide the best resources for their children, housing needs. And we're just so focused on punitive measures as if that's like a scare tactic, when in reality it's not. We're focusing the energy on the wrong place, on actually providing these resources, making these resources available. And yes, I think that's it's also like a cultural change in our mindset that we're not going to fix problems with punitive scare tactics. We really need to like transform the resources we have in our community, and not, as Nancy said, like not blame parents or talk about parents as if they're just if they're struggling, they're unable to be parents, or they're unable. Like we have to like have compassion in situations that don't involve us or that we haven't had to deal with, and really like try to help people through that, because many times people, if you give them a hand, they will do the work.
Thanks, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
What do y'all know about resources in outlying counties? That was another question. What are the resources available in outlying counties? I know that LAJC service area covers the counties that certainly surround Charlottesville, and actually LAJC is a statewide organization. So they have offices in Charlottesville, Richmond, Petersburg, and Northern Virginia. So folks can really get help in a very broad swath of the Commonwealth. But Nancy, do you know about other and Frank, that I know that's not all, so chime in too, but Nancy, what about other resources?
Okay, our service area, my service area mirrors the Planning District Commission and the Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition on Homeless. So in Greene County, I talked to people about the Community Action Agency Skyline CAP as a potential resource. There's also Grace, which is another resource in Greene. Louisa and Fluvanna, they have this Louisa Housing Trust Fund. I don't think they do a whole lot, but I do know that they are involved with some housing capacity for folks. Nelson County has a community fund. It's, I think, privately fundraised for. I don't think they have any public funds for that. I'm not really sure what else flew back, but those are the ones that I've come across.
Okay, great. Anything to add, Frank?
Not, I think you mentioned it. We have offices in Petersburg, Falls Church, Richmond, and Charlottesville. But in addition to that, if you call Legway Justice Center, I know our staff will help either if we're not able to refer to someone in those localities, either through our networks, that will be able to put people in touch with resources in their area.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning that. That's so important. So I have two questions about youth who are either aging out of the foster care system or young adults. So I'm gonna try to combine them. We'll see how this works. So how do youth who age out of the foster care system stay connected with housing support services? And then a little bit more in depth on that. Are there ways or resources to help young adults advocate for themselves in terms of unfairness of meeting the 2.5 times income and credit requirements that prevent them from finding housing? Maybe I shouldn't have combined them.
I kind of have an answer, and I'd be glad to share. There is a program, it's a trial program, it's called Fostering Futures.
Yeah.
And that addresses, well, I still call them children, but young adults that are aging out of the foster care system. There's that. And the other part of the question about when you're young and you don't have an established history,
right?
You know, you have to create a narrative, I think, about yourself. You know, maybe there is something, you know, maybe there's some job stability or income stability, whatever that might be. You know, that you can talk to yourself. I think with the recent opening that Piedmont Housing Alliance has with their Financial Opportunity Center, and they will hire for a navigator for their housing hub. That might be a way just to talk to someone about how do you advocate, how do you empower yourself to try and you know, move in to a housing option. Maybe I'm being a little optimistic, but I think that there are ways, but you know, we have to be willing to talk with that person and work through, you know, some of these questions when you have someone that's, you know, very young or young adult and they're just starting out. I mean, because it's you know, it's changed so much in the decades since I was, you know, that age. And you know, it was very different. I didn't have to do a lot of self-advocating. It was like pay the fee, be approved, you know. But I think it also, you know, it can also be like I say, it's a narrative that you sometimes have to create about yourself, a story that you need to be able to, you know, give to someone that can result in a housing option. I don't know, Frank, do you have any other pointers or tips or things?
I was just gonna say this is something that we're actually looking into and doing research here in the Charlottesville community, which I can like talk about. I was gonna plug in later, but we're currently talking, doing listening sessions and trying to talk to either youth currently or a big group too is youth who have aged out of the foster care system here in Charlottesville to find out about their experiences and their struggles, doing exactly what that what the question was. So yeah, like this Saturday we have a listening session too for either parents or families or youth themselves who navigated the foster care or child welfare system. But yeah, that's an important question. That's something we're looking into and trying to learn more about what, especially here locally in the Charlottesville context.
That's great. I have another question that came in. How much do shelters, so I think domestic violence shelters or other shelters of the sort, help with housing?
Shall I take a stab at it, Frank? Yeah. Well, I mean, they can help in that they can perhaps navigate to a degree, but the funding piece, they don't have. I will say that I do know that the DV shelter here does try and navigate and try to help families find housing, but they don't have the funding piece that allows them to do that whole process themselves. So they do rely on other resources, whether it's pathways or prevention or a voucher, one of those hard to come by, vouchers that the community, gets either more vouchers to or more money to be able to extend more vouchers, or whether, vouchers are reused. So they, and the emergency shelter in this area, I'm not really well versed on Salvation Army as to what they actually do in-house. I think they try, but there again, it's the infrastructure of having adequate numbers of staff to be able to devote, that kind of time to addressing that situation. If you don't have that adequate infrastructure, you have to decide what is your primary mission and, work with that, and then try and connect folks outside of your mission scope to those resources that can help.
Right. Frank, we had a question that came in asking about the listening sessions and whether the public could attend, or whether those are really meant for folks with lived experience in the foster care system.
Yeah, so these listening sessions we are trying to focus it on people that are directly impacted. So either current or former foster children, or families who had their children put into the foster system. So yeah, these are not really open to the public, but there will be opportunities in the future for people that want to highly engage on this topic. There will be further opportunities to engage if this is something you're passionate about.
Great, thanks for that, Frank. Yeah, and just to be clear, I think that question that comes from a place not of just wanting to be a fly on the wall, but to just deepen and their perspective about the lived experience of folks who are involved in the system. So I'm out of questions, but I'm happy to take more if folks have them. If you want to send them through to the chat, or if you really want to ask your question out loud, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I had a few other questions I could ask. Well, I guess oh, here we go. Are you willing to share your contact information for further collaboration? So maybe you could tuck that into the chat if you don't mind, Frank and Nancy. And I had a question. So what about me as an individual? If I really want to support the housing, the homeless population in Charlottesville, what can I do as an individual to impact this issue?
That's a pretty loaded question. I think if you want to support, because I'm waiting to see, what the domino effect of this pandemic will be, because we're just now really coming to the end of eviction moratoriums and things like that. There have been some, Virginia has adopted some laws over the last couple of years that kind of barely strengthen tenants' rights, but they do. So, I'm not really sure what that's going to look like, because traditionally or through the data over the last decade or so, families themselves don't often fall into homelessness. They end up, doubling up, but then that also brings, then a lot of other issues come out of that. Because a lot of folks do not want to see kids in a car or in a tent or in a, whatever,
Right.
versus grown adults who can sometimes manage a system. But I think the biggest thing that one can do is to volunteer or support homeless service providers. There's plenty of organizations out there, because we know that public funding doesn't address everything. That's how specifically the Haven Housing Fund arose, because there was a gap that was seen, and decided to privately fundraise for that gap. That gap is folks who are without shelter, who are able to work, because a lot of folks who are without shelter are employed or have some form of income, and they're able to then locate a housing option, but they need that boost up with a security deposit. Sometimes they can come up with the first month's rent. They're resourceful enough to do that, but to come up with, $1,200 or $1,300, $1,500 at one fell swoop, it's not that easy. So that's how that arose, was from that gap. So there are gaps. I think if you're looking at public policy, to definitely follow what's happening in the city, the county, Albemarle County, I can't speak to other counties, but Albemarle County is looking at their housing plan, and they certainly, need to look at what I call the urban ring or suburban ring right around the city's boundaries, because there are a lot of housing complexes that have rents that are affordable compared to other places. So I think that that's part of how you support them. And I think also, just learning as much as you can yourself as an individual about what homelessness is. I mean, there's a lot of hidden homeless people, and a lot of those hidden homeless people live in motels, and those are families. I think Laura could probably support that statement, that there are a lot of families, in hotels. So there's a lot of folks that you don't see. It's becoming, learning. It's relational. I think you have to have a relationship with people in order to advocate for them.
There was a question that came through that asked, what is PACHAM?
PACHAM is do you mind if I take this one, Frank? Well, PACHAM is called People and Congregations Engaged in Ministries. It arose about 12, 13 years ago, when someone actually lost their life to hypothermia on the downtown mall. And it is a nonprofit that engages with different congregations throughout the Charlottesville, Albemarle, Green even, communities to provide temporary thermal shelter when it's cold. Now, last year, the pandemic has kind of thrown a wrench into that process. Also, PACHAM is now engaged with a project out on Route 29 that is a shelter for those who have compromised conditions that would make them more susceptible to contracting COVID. So, but they have been able, through, I think, some funding and hard work, they're going to open a men's congregate shelter for only 20 men, I think early November. They are working to determine how they will be able to provide thermal shelter for unhoused women. That's still up in the air.
Thanks, Nancy. Frank, I'll give you the last word on the question of, you care about this. I care about this subject. What can I do to make an impact?
I would say like first and foremost, like support the organizations that have been doing the work, like the Haven, the public housing and low income coalitions here in Charlottesville, like FAR, and the the Charlottesville Low-Income Housing Coalition. There's organizations that are advocating right now for policies and practices. I would say show up for them physically or also financially too. Money does go a long way. And yeah, support like the Charlottesville, the future land use map also. Other what was I going to mention, the short-term investments to, like I think I had mentioned earlier, the voucher program that the city has created to try to overcome affordable housing problem. That just means that people could use vouchers with any landlord in the city, and the tenant should only have to pay 30% of the income for that rent. However, we're still running into problems where with discrimination, where landlords are turning away people. So it's like there's a lot of ways to help, either through these short-term ways or like long-term, like the future land use map and supporting that, which also only goes so far, right? This is it can be successful with the combination of other strong policies for affordable housing and regulation and funding. And so yeah, that's those are some ways to get involved. Those are not the only ways. But yeah, show up, and I think also doing research, like well, I think another thing too is like when not like even in like that this is direct ways to get involved, but indirectly when it comes to if you're let's say a teacher in a classroom or any kind of organization you're a part of, is being very sensitive to these issues and not treating them as a second thought. So let's say you're a teacher in a classroom, like making your classroom accessible to this from the start. Even if you assume there's 0 children that are homeless or houseless in your classroom, always assume there are a lot. So never assume that there isn't houseless children in your classroom, or there isn't disabled children in your classroom. Just as you should do with anything with undocumented children, make your spaces accessible to everyone, like a blanket accessibility to all, because you never know what people are going through, and so your compassion can go a long way, and you never know who you're helping out by just making spaces accessible. So like knowing about these resources, familiarizing yourself with these resources, maybe passing them out in your classroom. I'm talking about education, but that goes with anything, community organizations, children you might work with, families you might work with. I would just say that make it accessible, because you never know who you can help along the way. And if we just normalize that, it can just make the work of a lot of these organizations a lot easier. Yeah, so that's one thing I would say. I don't know if you have anything else to say, Nancy.
Well, I was just going to do one anecdote. Several years ago, with my predecessor doing this job, she was meeting someone to get to drop off a check, and they were meeting at the apartment where this mom and her son were going to move into. And first time he had seen it, and he was very excited and looked up at his mom and asked if this was going to be their forever home. So I think that is a driving anecdote for me in this work.
Well, on that note, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Frank. This has just been a really, really enlightening conversation, and I appreciate the work that you're both doing so much. And thank you for helping us to learn about how we can do better work and just be more accessible as we are interacting with the kids and families that we're working with, and more empathetic. So thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, especially you, Nancy, at the beach. Enjoy the beach for all of us. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.